The Carter family had been dreaming of a peaceful vacation for months, an escape from the chaos of daily life. Finally, as they boarded the plane, they were ready to unwind and enjoy their long-awaited trip. But as they settled into their premium economy seats, their dream was shattered. A flight attendant named Olivia Blake approached them with a stern look, claiming their tickets were invalid. What started as a routine flight quickly spiraled into an intense confrontation. The family was forced to leave their seats, but the tension didn't end there. Watch as this seemingly small misunderstanding unravels into a bigger issue that challenges the family's rights and dignity. What happens next will have you questioning how assumptions and biases can shape our experiences in the most unexpected ways. What do you think of this situation? Where are you watching from? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, like this video, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to stay updated on our latest content. The Carter family had been planning this vacation for months, a much-needed escape after a year of hard work and personal challenges. They were finally on board the plane, heading to their dream destination, looking forward to spending quality time together. The excitement was palpable as they settled into their premium economy seats, the spaciousness and comfort offering a welcome contrast to the chaos of their busy lives. It was supposed to be a relaxing experience, one where they could unwind and enjoy the journey as much as the destination. But their dream trip quickly turned into a nightmare. As the family was getting comfortable, adjusting their seatbelts and preparing for takeoff, the door to the premium economy section swung open. A flight attendant, with a stern expression and a clipboard in hand, entered the cabin and walked straight toward them. The family smiled politely, expecting a normal interaction. A routine exchange that would set the tone for their flight. Instead, they were met with an unexpected confrontation. The flight attendant, whose name was Karen Miller, looked down at her clipboard and then up at the family with a look of suspicion. Without any preamble, she pointed to the family's seats and announced that they would need to vacate them immediately. The family was taken aback. They had confirmed their premium economy seats when they booked their tickets, and everything seemed in order. The father, James Carter, politely explained this to Karen, showing her the reservation details on his phone. But instead of apologizing or offering any clarification, Karen simply shook her head, her demeanor growing more authoritative by the second. "You're in the wrong seats," she insisted, her tone becoming sharp and impatient. "These seats are reserved for someone else. I need you to move to the back of the plane." Confusion set in as James and his wife, Linda, looked at each other in disbelief. They had carefully chosen these seats, paying extra for the comfort and added space in premium economy. They were not about to move without understanding why. "I don't think there's been a mistake," James said calmly, trying to de-escalate the situation. "We've checked everything, and these seats are assigned to us." But Karen wasn't hearing it. "I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave these seats and move to the back. You're not supposed to be here," she repeated, her voice now tinged with annoyance. The family was stunned. How could this be happening? Why was she insisting that their tickets were invalid when they had done everything by the book? The children, sitting quietly in their seats, looked up nervously, sensing the tension. The once excited energy in the cabin had shifted, replaced by an uneasy atmosphere. The surrounding passengers, who had been minding their own business, started to take notice of the unfolding exchange. Some turned their heads subtly, while others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Linda, ever the calm one, tried to reason with Karen, showing her their boarding passes once again, but Karen simply dismissed her attempts. "I don't have time for this," Karen snapped, glancing over her shoulder toward the flight attendant's station. "I'm giving you one last chance to comply." At this point, the family's discomfort was palpable. They had no idea why they were being targeted. Their vacation, which had begun with such high hopes, was now starting to unravel, all because of a misunderstanding they couldn't fathom. The frustration built within James as he struggled to figure out how to resolve the situation. Was it possible that their tickets had been switched up? Or worse, was there some sort of mistake in the booking system? The pressure was mounting. The once friendly atmosphere of the flight had shifted into a tense standoff between the family and Karen, the flight attendant. James and Linda exchanged glances, silently debating how to handle this bizarre situation. Should they push back, demand to speak with a supervisor, or just comply with the flight attendant's orders to avoid further conflict? They knew their children were watching, and they didn't want them to feel anxious or frightened. But the unsettling feeling of being questioned in front of so many people, for reasons that seemed unjustified, was hard to ignore. As the seconds ticked by, the family realized they had no choice but to comply, at least for the moment. They gathered their things, slowly rising from their seats, and began to move to the back of the plane, their excitement for the trip now replaced by an uncomfortable sense of humiliation. The passengers around them continued to watch, many of them clearly perplexed by the scene unfolding before them. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog, leaving the Carter family wondering how their dream vacation had been derailed so abruptly. Karen Miller, a seasoned flight attendant, had worked at Skyline Airlines for over a decade. She was known for her punctuality, her adherence to protocol, and her no-nonsense attitude toward enforcing the rules. But as she stood in front of the Carter family, something about this situation felt different. There was a strange undercurrent in the air, a quiet sense of tension that she couldn't quite place. She had dealt with passenger complaints and seat reassignment issues before, but never had she faced such resistance. At first, Karen had assumed that the family had made a simple mistake when they boarded. It wasn't uncommon for passengers to get confused about their seat assignments, especially in the premium sections. But as she reviewed their boarding passes, something about the family's demeanor struck her. They seemed calm, collected, and sure of themselves. This wasn't a case of confused travelers. No, these people were acting as though they belonged in the seats they had chosen. But the more Karen looked at their tickets, the more uncertain she became. There was something off about their seating. The rows were marked as occupied by other passengers, and according to the seating chart, these particular seats were booked for a different group of high-priority customers. Confusion set in, and for the first time in years, Karen found herself questioning the validity of her own actions. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. After all, she was just doing her job, making sure the rules were followed. It wasn't her place to question the booking system. She just had to enforce what was on the manifest. "Please, ma'am, you're in the wrong seats," Karen said again, her voice slightly firmer this time. "I need you to move to the back of the plane." James, now visibly frustrated but trying to keep his composure, showed her his boarding pass again. "These seats are booked and confirmed. We've already checked. Is there some kind of mix-up?" Karen hesitated, briefly scanning the family's boarding passes, her mind racing. The doubt in her mind made her uncomfortable. This wasn't just another routine check, it was turning into something personal. She had no idea why, but something about this family, about their demeanor, made her feel uneasy. Perhaps it was the way they looked at her, calm, but almost challenging. Or perhaps it was the way they seemed so sure of their rightful place on the plane. "Look, I'm not arguing with you," Karen replied, her tone turning sharp. "It's my job to enforce the seating assignments. These seats are for someone else. Please move." Linda, always the peacemaker, tried to stay calm. "We're happy to move, but we just need to understand what happened," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge of concern. "Are you sure there isn't a mistake? We've confirmed these seats." Karen's eyes darted nervously to the seating chart on her clipboard, her uncertainty growing. But instead of backing down, she stuck to her position. The tension in the air was thick, and Karen could feel the gaze of the other passengers weighing heavily on her. Some were starting to notice the exchange, their curiosity piqued by the unusual back and forth. She was under pressure, and she didn't like it. "I've already told you," Karen snapped, "I'm not going to argue. Just move to the back." But as the family hesitated, reluctant to move, Karen's impatience started to show. She wasn't prepared for this kind of resistance. She had expected them to comply without hesitation, just as most passengers did. But there was something different about this family, something that made her question her own actions. The passengers around them were starting to notice, some of them shifting uncomfortably in their seats. A quiet murmur began to ripple through the cabin, as people whispered to one another. The Carter family, who had been so excited about their trip, now felt like they were the center of unwanted attention. It was a feeling they hadn't anticipated when they boarded the plane just hours earlier. Finally, after several long moments of tense silence, James made the decision to move. He had no choice. They couldn't afford to make a scene. As he and Linda gathered their things, the reality of the situation hit them. This was no ordinary seat mix-up, it was something more. Something deeper. The unease they had felt when they first stepped onto the plane had morphed into a feeling of humiliation, and they couldn't help but wonder if this had anything to do with the assumptions others were making about them based on their appearance. The Carter family reluctantly moved to the back of the plane, their hopes of a peaceful and relaxing journey now dashed. As they made their way down the aisle, the tension in the air felt suffocating. The passengers watched in silence, some shaking their heads, others exchanging furtive glances. The dream trip they had been looking forward to had already started to unravel, and they couldn't help but feel that something far more insidious was at play. The Carter family's attempt to settle into their new seats at the back of the plane had done little to alleviate the mounting tension. The once joyful anticipation of their vacation was now replaced with a deep sense of discomfort, not just from being displaced, but from the strange interaction they had just endured. James, Linda, and their two children, Ava and Lucas, were doing their best to remain composed, but the sting of being wrongfully questioned in such a public way was hard to ignore. They found their seats in the economy section, nowhere near the comfort and spaciousness they had paid for in the premium economy cabin. The cramped space felt suffocating, and their quiet frustration was only compounded by the murmurs of nearby passengers, some of whom had witnessed the exchange. James looked over at Linda, trying to gauge her mood. She was always the rock in their family, but even she was visibly shaken. "I don't understand, James. We had everything confirmed. How could this happen?" Linda whispered, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to escape. "I don't know," James replied, his voice low and frustrated. "But we need to just sit tight for now. We don't want to make things worse." Linda nodded, but the unease didn't leave her. She could feel the weight of every judgmental glance from the other passengers. How could this be happening? It was supposed to be a dream vacation, one that they had saved for and planned carefully. But in this moment, their plans had been ripped away from them by a flight attendant's sudden and unjust actions. As the plane began to taxi down the runway, the flight attendants made their rounds, preparing for takeoff. James and Linda exchanged another look, both of them hoping the situation would resolve itself without further incident. But in the back of their minds, they couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Something had been triggered deep inside them. They had been treated unfairly, and they both knew they weren't the kind of family to simply sit back and accept injustice. Back in the premium economy section, Karen Miller, the flight attendant who had caused the disruption, was struggling with her own internal conflict. She had been a flight attendant for years, used to dealing with difficult situations and irate passengers. But this felt different. She was used to enforcing the rules, but now, as she thought back on her interaction with the Carter family, a knot of doubt had settled in her stomach. Had she made a mistake? Had she overstepped in assuming their tickets were invalid? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that something wasn't adding up. Karen had seen their boarding passes. She had checked them twice. Yet, something about the family's calm, dignified manner had unsettled her. They didn't seem like the typical premium economy passengers. It wasn't their appearance that had made her question them, no, that wasn't it. It was more about the way they carried themselves. They seemed out of place in the premium section, as if they didn't belong there. It wasn't a thought Karen liked to acknowledge, but it was there. Her own biases, her own assumptions, had crept in, and she hadn't even realized it. As the plane lifted off, the sudden realization hit her: she had acted rashly. The Carter family had every right to be in those seats. She had been wrong, and now, there was nothing she could do to undo the damage. The rest of the flight was a blur for Karen as she continued to serve passengers, her thoughts constantly returning to the family she had displaced. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had been unfairly treated, and the weight of her actions hung heavily on her conscience. Meanwhile, in the back of the plane, the Carter family tried to make the best of their new seats. They were cramped, uncomfortable, and far from the luxurious space they had paid extra for, but they tried not to show how hurt they were. Ava, their daughter, looked out the window, her big brown eyes wide with uncertainty. Lucas, her younger brother, stared at the back of the seat in front of him, his small hands clutching the armrests. The children had no idea what was going on, they were just confused and scared. The tension in the cabin was palpable, and the sense of humiliation was like a weight on the family's shoulders. Linda finally broke the silence. "James, I can't just sit here. We need to do something. We can't let her get away with this." James looked at her, his brow furrowing. He could feel the same frustration building up in him. He hated how helpless they felt. "I know, but we don't want to make a scene. Let's get through this flight, and we'll figure it out once we're on the ground. I promise you, we'll make sure this doesn't go unnoticed." But Linda wasn't so sure. The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She had worked hard to get to this point in her life. They all had. And now, because of one person's actions, their entire vacation was at risk of being ruined. It wasn't just the inconvenience, it was the principle of it. They had been treated with such disrespect, and they weren't sure how much more they could take. In the meantime, Robert Hayes, a businessman traveling in first class, had been watching the entire incident unfold from his seat. Robert was no stranger to high-pressure situations. His career in finance had taught him how to read people quickly, how to discern the truth in moments of tension. He had been observing the Carter family ever since the flight attendant, Karen, had first approached them. At first, Robert thought it was just a routine misunderstanding, something that could be easily resolved. But as he continued to watch, he realized it wasn't that simple. He could see the discomfort in the Carter family's eyes, the way they tried to reason with Karen. And he could see Karen's increasingly impatient behavior, the way she dismissed their attempts to explain the situation. It didn't sit right with him. Robert had been a witness to plenty of uncomfortable situations in his life, but this felt different. He knew something was wrong, and he couldn't just sit by and ignore it. Without a second thought, he took out his phone and began composing an email to the airline's customer service team. He detailed the incident, highlighting the way the Carter family had been treated, and made it clear that he felt something needed to be done. He couldn't stand by and watch an innocent family suffer because of a flight attendant's prejudice. Robert hit send and leaned back in his seat, hoping that his actions would prompt a response. But even as he waited, he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play, something that would soon become much bigger than just a misunderstanding over seat assignments. Back in the cabin, the tension continued to rise. The passengers in the back were starting to notice the growing discontent. Some whispered to each other, exchanging concerned looks. Others just stared ahead, unwilling to get involved. The Carter family, meanwhile, did their best to stay quiet, but the damage had already been done. They couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was watching them, judging them. As the plane flew on, the Carter family tried to focus on anything but the situation. They tried to distract the children with toys and games, but it was impossible to ignore the underlying discomfort that had settled over them all. James and Linda exchanged worried glances, their minds racing. How could this have happened? What had gone wrong? They had done everything right, booked their tickets months in advance, confirmed their seats, and arrived at the airport on time. They were supposed to be enjoying a peaceful flight, not enduring this humiliation. Linda sighed deeply. James, I don't know how much longer I can take this. We've been through so much already, and now this. I know, Linda, James replied softly. But we'll get through this. We'll get to the bottom of it once we land. This isn't over. But deep down, both of them knew it wouldn't be easy. This was no ordinary mistake, it was a reflection of something bigger, something far more systemic. The biases that had led to this situation would be harder to resolve than any seat mix-up. And as they sat there, surrounded by strangers, the reality began to set in. This wasn't just about a seat. It was about the way the world saw them. The way the world often saw people like them. As the plane continued its journey, the captain, Gregory Holt, was alerted to the situation. The airline's protocol required that any disputes regarding seat assignments be brought to the captain's attention, especially when the issue escalated to the level it had with the Carter family. Gregory Holt was no stranger to dealing with difficult situations, but he had a reputation for being fair and level-headed. He wasn't about to let a simple misunderstanding spoil a flight, especially not when it involved the treatment of passengers. He quickly made his way to the front of the plane, where the flight attendants were preparing for the next phase of the flight. The crew members, who had been aware of the situation, greeted him with an air of concern. It was clear that this wasn't just a case of bad luck, it was something that needed to be addressed immediately. After speaking briefly with Karen Miller, the flight attendant who had initially confronted the Carter family, Gregory stepped into the cockpit to review the flight's manifest. He wanted to see the facts for himself before making any judgments. It didn't take long for him to confirm what the family had been saying all along. The Carter family's tickets were valid. They had paid for their premium economy seats, and there had been no mistake in their booking. The realization hit Gregory hard. Karen Miller had acted rashly, without verifying the facts. Her assumptions had led to a series of mistakes, all of which had resulted in unnecessary discomfort for the passengers. Gregory knew that this would need to be addressed. There was no way to undo the damage that had been done, but he was determined to make things right. He made his way back into the cabin, his face set in a stern expression. He approached Karen, who was now standing by, nervously eyeing the family in the back. Without wasting any time, Gregory addressed the situation head-on. Karen, he began, his voice firm but calm, I've reviewed the manifest. The Carter family's tickets are valid. They've paid for those seats, and there was no reason for you to ask them to move. Karen's face turned pale as she realized the gravity of her actions. She opened her mouth to respond, but Gregory cut her off. This is a serious matter, Karen. You've caused unnecessary distress for these passengers, and it's going to be addressed. She nodded, unable to find the words to explain herself. Gregory had already made up his mind. The situation was far from over, and he knew it. As he walked toward the back of the plane to speak with the Carter family, the weight of the situation settled on him. He couldn't let this stand. He had to make sure that the family received the apology they deserved, and that Karen's actions were held accountable. The next steps would be difficult, but Gregory was committed to doing the right thing. As the plane continued its flight, Olivia Blake, the flight attendant who had caused the incident with the Carter family, couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in her stomach. Her actions earlier had felt routine at first, just another passenger misunderstanding that could easily be rectified. But now, as she continued to carry out her duties, it became increasingly clear to her that this situation was much more serious than she had initially realized. Olivia had been a flight attendant for over 5 years, and in that time, she had encountered countless disgruntled passengers. However, the confrontation with the Carter family felt different. From the moment she had confronted them about their seats, something about their calm yet firm demeanor had unsettled her. As the family had moved to the back of the plane, Olivia couldn't help but feel a lingering discomfort. She hadn't meant for things to escalate the way they had, but now, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that she had mishandled the entire situation. As the flight continued, Olivia's nerves began to fray. She had always prided herself on being professional, on handling even the most challenging passengers with grace. But this felt like a failure. Her gut told her that something had gone horribly wrong. The tension in the air was palpable, and she could feel it. Passengers around her, who had been silent witnesses to the entire exchange, seemed to avoid eye contact, as if the weight of the situation was too uncomfortable to bear. Olivia's colleagues, the other flight attendants, moved around her with a sense of professionalism, but even they couldn't escape the underlying tension. She couldn't focus on her duties. Her mind kept wandering back to the Carter family. They had been nothing but polite and respectful, yet she had treated them as if they were in the wrong. They had paid for their tickets, they had every right to be in their seats, and yet she had asked them to move without thoroughly checking the facts. What had made her so certain that they didn't belong? What had triggered that gut feeling that, in hindsight, felt like prejudice? The realization was slowly sinking in, she had acted based on assumptions. She hadn't stopped to verify the facts before confronting the family. The more Olivia thought about it, the more her sense of guilt deepened. It was one thing to make a mistake, it was another to let her personal biases cloud her judgment and affect another person's experience. The moment the plane reached cruising altitude, Olivia took a brief moment to step into the galley. She leaned against the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to calm her racing thoughts. Her reflection in the polished surface of the galley window seemed to mock her, professional, poised, and yet so far from the person she wanted to be. Suddenly, her thoughts were interrupted by the voice of Ethan, a senior staff member, who had come to check on her. Ethan had been working with Olivia for nearly a year and had always seen her as a competent and reliable member of the team. However, the look on his face as he approached told her that something was wrong. "Olivia, we need to talk," Ethan said, his voice low but serious. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She knew exactly what he was referring to, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the consequences of her actions. She nodded, gesturing for him to follow her into the galley where they could speak privately. "Ethan, I know I messed up," Olivia began, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't think it would escalate like that. I should have verified their tickets. I should have done more to calm the situation down instead of just asking them to move." Ethan watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. "Olivia, I'm not here to lecture you. But what you did today was not just a mistake. It was a breach of protocol, and it's something that we can't just brush off." Olivia's stomach dropped at his words. She had expected a reprimand, but hearing it from Ethan, someone she had always respected, felt like a punch to the gut. "I know," Olivia said, her voice cracking. "But I didn't mean to, Olivia, it's not about intent," Ethan interrupted gently. "It's about the impact. You made that family feel unwelcome, and worse, you did it in front of everyone. Passengers don't forget things like that. And unfortunately, it's not just the family that's affected. We've had complaints coming in already. It's already spreading through the cabin, and it's going to be a topic of discussion for a long time." Olivia closed her eyes, her breath shaky as she processed the gravity of the situation. She had hoped it would blow over, that once the flight was over, everything would return to normal. But she knew deep down that this was no ordinary incident. This had consequences, and they were just beginning. "I didn't mean for it to get like this," Olivia said softly. I didn't think." "I know," Ethan said, his voice softening. "But we need to address it now, before it gets worse. I've already spoken to Captain Gregory Holt. He's looking into the situation, and the airline's management has been alerted. We can't ignore this." Olivia felt her face flush with embarrassment. She had been hoping, desperately hoping, that the situation would resolve itself without further incident. But now, it seemed like the repercussions of her actions were only just beginning to unfold. "Olivia, the management team is taking this very seriously," Ethan continued. "You need to prepare yourself. There's a chance you could be relieved of your duties, at least temporarily, while they conduct an investigation. The weight of Ethan's words hit Olivia like a ton of bricks. Relief of duties? An investigation? She couldn't believe it. How had it come to this? She had made a simple mistake, hadn't she? It was supposed to be a minor incident, a misunderstanding. But now, it was spiraling into something much larger, something she couldn't control. I understand, Olivia said quietly, her voice barely audible. I'll cooperate fully. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I don't know what came over me. Ethan gave her a sympathetic nod, but his expression remained serious. Olivia, you need to think about what happened today, and what you're going to do going forward. This isn't just about this flight, this is about the company's reputation, and it's about how you represent Skyline Airlines. As Ethan left her alone in the galley, Olivia's mind raced. The flight seemed to stretch on for eternity as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. How had she allowed her biases to control her actions? How had she let something as simple as a seating mix-up become such a serious incident? She had spent so many years building her career, gaining respect from her colleagues, and now, it seemed like all of that was about to come crashing down. The rest of the flight was a blur for Olivia. She continued with her duties, but her mind wasn't focused on the passengers or the service. Every time she passed by the Carter family's row, she felt a pang of guilt in her chest. They were sitting there, quietly, waiting for the flight to be over, but the tension between them was thick. It wasn't just their seats that had been taken, it was their dignity, their respect, and Olivia knew that it was her fault. As the plane began its descent toward the airport, Olivia was called back to the galley. She knew it was time to face the consequences. The weight of what she had done hung over her like a storm cloud, and she knew that there would be no easy way out. She had crossed a line, and she would have to live with the consequences. As the plane soared through the sky, Olivia Blake's heart sank further with each passing minute. Her mind was spiraling, replaying the events that had led her to this point. Every interaction with the Carter family had been a momentary lapse of judgment, but now, as the situation unfolded, she realized just how serious her actions had become. What started as a simple misunderstanding had turned into a public spectacle, one that threatened not only her career but also the reputation of Skyline Airlines. And as the minutes ticked by, she could feel the eyes of the passengers weighing on her every move. After the uncomfortable incident in the premium economy section, things had continued to escalate. The tension was palpable as the crew tried to go about their duties, but everyone seemed to be affected by what had happened. Some passengers remained silent, uncomfortable witnesses to the scene, while others exchanged hushed whispers, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. A few had even pulled out their phones, discreetly recording the incident. Olivia could feel the weight of every second passing by. Each moment felt like a countdown to something inevitable. She had tried to push the guilt to the back of her mind, but it was impossible to ignore the reality, something needed to be done. And soon. In the midst of all this, Robert Hayes, the businessman who had witnessed the confrontation from first class, had been stewing in his seat, thinking about what he had seen. He had watched, helplessly, as the Carter family was unjustly treated. He had felt the sting of the interaction, and his frustration grew as he saw Olivia's dismissive attitude toward the family's legitimate concerns. Robert was a man who had built his own career on fairness, integrity, and respect for others. What he had witnessed on the plane flew in the face of everything he stood for. Unable to remain passive, Robert had discreetly pulled out his phone and began drafting an email to the airline's management team. The message was direct, outlining the entire incident and emphasizing the need for immediate action. Robert explained how the Carter family had been mistreated, how they had complied with every request made of them, and how Olivia's treatment of them was far from professional. He was not only upset by what had happened but also deeply concerned about the ripple effects this incident would have if left unchecked. He sent the email off to Skyline Airlines customer service department, hoping that it would reach the right people. He couldn't just sit there and do nothing. He knew that this wasn't just about the family, it was about setting a precedent for how passengers should be treated in the future. No one should be made to feel like they didn't belong, especially when they had every right to occupy the space they had paid for. Back in the economy section, the Carter family continued to try to make the best of the situation, but the damage had been done. The flight that was supposed to be a relaxing escape was now a nightmare. James Carter kept a calm exterior for the sake of his family, but inside, he was seething. The whole ordeal had shaken him to his core. He couldn't understand how someone could treat them that way, and he knew that something had to be done. This wasn't just about a mix-up with their seat, it was about the way they had been judged based on their appearance and assumptions that had nothing to do with the reality of their situation. Linda, too, was struggling with the sense of injustice. She had been quiet throughout most of the flight, but the events of the past hour had brought her to a breaking point. She wasn't just upset about being moved to the back of the plane, she was angry about how she had been treated, about the way her family had been made to feel like they didn't belong in first class. It wasn't just about a seat. It was about respect. And she felt like they had been denied that respect for no reason other than assumptions based on their appearances. Ava and Lucas, though young, sensed the tension around them. They were both quiet, their faces drawn with confusion. They had been excited about the trip, looking forward to spending time with their parents in a new city, but now they were caught in the middle of a situation that was beyond their understanding. Ava, the older of the two, looked up at her mother with big, concerned eyes. "Mom, why did the lady ask us to move? We didn't do anything wrong." Linda smiled faintly, trying to reassure her daughter. "Sometimes, people make mistakes, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle but tinged with sadness. "But we'll be okay. We're together, and that's all that matters." James squeezed Linda's hand, his resolve hardening. He wasn't going to let this slide. Not for his children. Not for his family. Once they landed, he would make sure that the airline knew exactly what had happened. They couldn't let this go unaddressed. If they did, it would send the message that this kind of treatment was acceptable. And it wasn't. Meanwhile, in the first-class cabin, Robert's email had been received by the airline's customer service team, and it didn't take long for the management to take notice. The email was passed along to Marcus Bryant, the airline's director of passenger relations, who immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Skyline Airlines had a reputation for being one of the most respected in the industry, and the thought that one of their flight attendants had acted so unprofessionally was not something that could be ignored. Marcus immediately began coordinating with the relevant parties. He needed to speak with the captain of the flight, Gregory Holt, to get a first-hand account of what had happened. He also needed to speak with Olivia Blake, the flight attendant involved, and ensure that her actions were being addressed. The last thing he wanted was for the incident to escalate further, especially with a social media storm brewing. Within minutes, Marcus had sent a message to Captain Holt, asking him to meet as soon as the plane landed. He also reached out to the airline's legal team to ensure that the company was prepared for any fallout from the incident. Marcus knew that this wasn't just about a single passenger complaint, it was about the way the company responded to situations like this in the future. He couldn't let this moment slip by without taking action. Back in the galley, Olivia Blake had become increasingly agitated as the hours wore on. She was used to dealing with difficult passengers, but this felt different. She had acted out of instinct, and now, as she thought about it, she realized just how wrong she had been. She had judged the Carter family based on nothing but her own assumptions, and in doing so, she had unfairly treated them. The guilt was gnawing at her, and she found herself questioning her own professionalism. She had been hoping that things would blow over. After all, the family had complied with her request, and they had moved to the back of the plane without causing a scene. She had assumed that once they landed, everything would be forgotten. But now, with the growing tension in the cabin, she realized that this was far from over. The passengers who had witnessed the situation weren't just going to forget it. The ripple effects would be felt long after the flight landed. As Olivia paced nervously in the galley, she heard the intercom crackle to life. It was Captain Gregory Holt. "Olivia, I need to speak with you," his voice rang out. The tone in his voice sent a chill down Olivia's spine. She knew what was coming. She had been dreading this moment since the confrontation with the Carter family. She had hoped, with all her heart, that she wouldn't have to face the consequences of her actions. But now, as she headed toward the cockpit, she knew it was inevitable. The damage had been done. And no matter how much she regretted it, there was no turning back. As the plane descended toward its final destination, Olivia Blake's thoughts were a whirlpool of regret, guilt, and confusion. Every second that passed felt like a countdown, a reminder that her actions had consequences she hadn't fully grasped. The Carter family's confrontation had seemed so trivial at first, just a misunderstanding, a simple mix-up with seating. But as the reality of the situation settled in, she realized it was far more than that. She had made an unforgivable mistake, and now she would have to live with the consequences. The silent stares of the passengers around her only made the weight of her actions heavier. Her instincts, which had been wrong from the start, had led to the unjust treatment of a family who had simply been trying to enjoy their vacation. What had started as a brief interaction had spiraled into something much more serious. Olivia had tried to maintain control over the flight, tried to do her job as best as she could, but now she was beginning to see the cracks in her professionalism. She had crossed a line, and there was no way to take it back. Her mind kept returning to the moment when she had first confronted the Carter family. They had been calm, composed, and polite, even as she had insisted they move from their seats. Olivia hadn't seen it then, but she saw it now. They had been in the right the entire time, and she had been the one who had gotten it wrong. She had judged them based on a feeling, a fleeting moment of doubt, and that had led to their humiliation. The family had been respectful, and all they had wanted was to relax and enjoy the flight, but instead, she had made them feel like intruders in a space they had every right to occupy. Olivia was shaken to her core. She had always prided herself on her ability to manage difficult situations with grace and tact, but this was different. This wasn't a minor mishap, it was a significant failure in her judgment, one that would haunt her for a long time. As the minutes ticked by, she could feel the tension mounting. The pressure was palpable, and she knew that once they landed, the consequences of her actions would be laid bare for everyone to see. Meanwhile, the Carter family was enduring the final leg of their journey in silence. James and Linda had both tried to comfort their children, but the damage had already been done. Ava and Lucas could sense the discomfort in the air. They had never seen their parents like this before, and it confused them. Why had they been asked to move from their seats? What had they done wrong? The children had no way of understanding the deeper dynamics at play, the prejudices and assumptions that had led to their displacement. James, who had remained calm throughout the flight, couldn't help but feel a growing sense of outrage. This wasn't just about a seat, it was about something much bigger. It was about respect, about the way people like his family were treated because of their appearance. They had paid for those premium economy seats, and yet, here they were, stuck in the back of the plane. It didn't matter that they had worked hard for everything they had, what mattered was that they were being judged based on something that had nothing to do with their worth or entitlement. Linda, too, was feeling the weight of the injustice. She had been trying to stay strong for her children, but the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. The flight that had been a much-needed escape had turned into an ordeal. She wasn't just upset by the seating mix-up, she was furious about the way they had been treated, about the lack of understanding and courtesy shown to them. She had spent years fighting to ensure that her family had the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. But here, on this plane, they were being treated as if they didn't belong. As the plane began its descent, James turned to Linda, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to make sure this doesn't go unnoticed. I don't care if we have to make a scene when we land. This isn't right." Linda nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I agree. We won't let them get away with this." The plane touched down, and the Carter family disembarked, their frustration still simmering. They made their way through the terminal, their eyes scanning the crowd, hoping to find someone who could offer an explanation for the way they had been treated. But the airport was bustling with activity, and the staff seemed indifferent to their plight. As they passed by the gates, they noticed a few passengers who had been on the flight staring at them, their expressions filled with judgment. It was as if the entire flight had become a public spectacle, and the Carter family had become the unwilling subjects. As they made their way toward the exit, James spotted a familiar face, Robert Hayes, the businessman from first class. Robert had been sitting a few rows ahead of the Carter family during the flight, and he had witnessed the entire incident. James had noticed him during the confrontation, and while he hadn't given much thought to the man at the time, now he felt a strange sense of hope. "Excuse me," James called out, walking toward Robert. Robert turned around, his face lighting up with recognition. "Mr. Carter, right?" he said, extending a hand. "I just wanted to say, I'm really sorry about what happened today. It was completely unfair." James shook his hand, surprised by the man's sincerity. "I appreciate that, but we need to make sure the airline knows what happened. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was something bigger than that. We need to make sure it doesn't happen again." Robert nodded, his expression serious. "I couldn't agree more. I've already sent an email to the airline's management. I outlined everything that happened, and I made it clear that this needs to be addressed immediately." Linda, who had been standing quietly beside James, spoke up. "Thank you for speaking out. It means a lot to us." Robert smiled warmly. "I couldn't just sit by and watch that happen. Everyone deserves respect, and what happened to your family was unacceptable." James felt a weight lift off his shoulders. For the first time since the confrontation, he felt like someone was listening. Someone cared. "I appreciate it. Thank you." As the conversation ended, Robert made his way toward the exit, and the Carter family continued on their journey, still shaken by the events of the flight but grateful for Robert's support. They knew that the battle wasn't over yet. They had to make sure their voices were heard and that the airline took responsibility for what had happened. But for the first time since the incident, they felt like they weren't alone. The dim light of the airplane cabin flickered as Olivia Blake sat in her seat, staring out the small window. The realization that her career was crumbling around her weighed heavily on her. As the plane descended into its final approach, Olivia felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. She had always prided herself on her professionalism, her ability to handle difficult situations with grace and poise. Yet now, all of that had unraveled in a matter of hours. The incident with the Carter family had started as a simple mistake, but it had spiraled into something much larger, something that she couldn't undo. Her thoughts were interrupted by the intercom system crackling to life. The captain, Gregory Holt, announced their final descent into the airport. Olivia was thankful for the distraction, but even as the plane began to make its descent, her mind remained fixated on what was to come. The flight had been a long one, and it felt like it would never end. She had been dreading the moment they landed, when the reality of her situation would hit full force. Olivia glanced down at her phone, and her heart sank. Her social media was flooded with messages, but they weren't the usual updates from friends or family. The hashtag Justice for Carter family was trending, and as she scrolled through the posts, she saw the video of her confrontation with the family. It had gone viral. Passengers had recorded the entire incident, and it had spread like wildfire across the internet. The comments were overwhelming, a mix of outrage and support for the Carter family. There were photos of the Carter family sitting in the back of the plane, their faces filled with frustration and confusion. In contrast, Olivia's actions were being dissected by thousands of people. The public had seen everything, her cold, condescending tone, the way she had dismissed the family without a second thought. The video had captured the moment in painful detail, and now, it was everywhere. Her stomach churned as she read through some of the comments. How could she treat a family like that? Unbelievable how she made them feel like they didn't belong. Olivia had never been this exposed before. She had spent years building a reputation in the airline industry, and now, with one misguided decision, all of it was crashing down. Her pride, her professionalism, it all felt like it had been shattered in an instant. As the plane touched down on the tarmac, Olivia's heart was heavy with the weight of what was coming. She had always believed that her job as a flight attendant was about more than just serving drinks and snacks, it was about ensuring the comfort and safety of passengers. But now, it seemed as if she had failed at the very core of what she was meant to do. She had made the Carter family feel unsafe, unwelcome, and humiliated. And the worst part was that she had done it without even realizing the full impact of her actions until it was too late. The plane came to a stop at the gate, and the seatbelt sign clicked off. Olivia slowly stood up, gathering her things. She couldn't shake the feeling that the entire cabin was watching her, even though most of the passengers had already begun to gather their belongings. The weight of their gazes felt suffocating. She had become a pariah on this flight, and now, as she made her way down the aisle, she knew that she was about to face even more consequences. As she walked toward the front of the plane, she could hear murmurs among the passengers. Some were still talking about the incident, while others were making sure their phones were turned off before deplaning. Olivia avoided making eye contact with anyone. She couldn't bring herself to face them. She had failed not only the Carter family but also herself, and now, she was about to face the fallout. When Olivia reached the gate, she was met by two uniformed airport security officers. Her heart skipped a beat, and she immediately knew what this meant. She wasn't just being escorted off the plane for a routine check, this was something far more serious. The officer's stern expressions told her everything she needed to know. "Olivia Blake?" one of the officers asked, his voice firm. Olivia nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, that's me. We need you to come with us," the officer said. "You're being escorted off the flight." Her knees felt weak, and she struggled to stay upright as the reality of the situation hit her. She was being removed from the plane. Her job, her career, it was all slipping through her fingers. As she walked with the officers toward the terminal, Olivia could hear whispers from the passengers in the gate area. The incident had clearly made its way through the airport, and she was being looked at like a criminal. She could feel the eyes on her, judging her every move. Her face burned with embarrassment, and she wanted nothing more than to disappear. Once outside the terminal, Olivia was escorted to a small office where she was told to wait. The officers didn't say much, and the silence was unbearable. Olivia's mind raced as she tried to prepare herself for the inevitable. She knew that her actions had consequences, but she hadn't realized just how severe they would be. As Olivia Blake sat in the small, sterile office, her thoughts were a chaotic jumble of guilt, disbelief, and regret. The silence in the room was deafening, and every second felt like an eternity. The officers who had escorted her off the plane had left, leaving her alone to face the consequences of her actions. Her phone, which had been buzzing incessantly since the moment she had left the plane, sat in front of her like an ominous reminder of the disaster that had unfolded. Olivia had tried to ignore the notifications at first, but now, unable to resist, she unlocked her phone and scanned the screen. The hashtags were everywhere, #Justice for Carter Family, #Olivia Blake is over, #airline racism. Her stomach turned as she saw how quickly the incident had gone viral. The video of her confrontation with the Carter family had been shared millions of times across social media platforms, and the outrage was growing by the minute. It wasn't just a local incident, it had become an international discussion. One post in particular caught her eye. It was a video clip of the moment she had demanded the Carter family leave their premium economy seats. The video showed the family's expressions of disbelief and discomfort as she spoke to them with an air of condescension. The caption read, "This is how you treat paying passengers. This flight attendant needs to be fired." The comments section was filled with hundreds of angry responses, and Olivia could already see the tide turning against her. She could no longer deny the truth. Her career was at the brink of collapse, and the flood of public criticism wasn't showing any signs of slowing down. She scrolled through more posts, seeing comments from former colleagues, airline staff, and even complete strangers who were horrified by her behavior. The reactions were a mixture of disappointment, outrage, and condemnation. She had always been known as a professional, someone who followed the rules and treated everyone with respect. But now, she was being painted as someone who was biased and prejudiced, and the damage to her reputation was irreversible. One comment stood out in particular: "This woman has no business working in customer service. If she can't treat people with respect, she shouldn't be in the airline industry." The word stung, and Olivia felt a deep pang of regret. How had it come to this? How had she allowed herself to make such a critical error in judgment? She had never considered herself to be prejudiced or discriminatory, yet her actions had proven otherwise. The harsh truth hit her like a wave: she had treated the Carter family unfairly, and now, there were thousands of people holding her accountable for it. The room felt smaller with every notification that buzzed on her phone. Olivia tried to steady her breathing, her hands shaking as she put the phone down on the desk. The reality of her situation had set in, and it felt suffocating. She had worked hard to build her career, to be someone her colleagues could rely on. She had been a model employee, one of the most dedicated flight attendants at Skyline Airlines. But now, all of that seemed irrelevant. One mistake, one moment of prejudice, and her entire career was unraveling. Olivia's mind raced as she thought about the people she had let down. The Carter family was just the beginning, but the ripple effects were far-reaching. The video wasn't just a record of her mistake, it was a symbol of the bias that still ran deep in society, a stark reminder that even well-meaning individuals could inadvertently perpetuate harm. Her actions, however unintentional, had been a reflection of the biases that people like her often overlooked. And now, she was paying the price for it. The door to the small office opened, and in walked Ethan, a senior staff member at Skyline Airlines. He had been with the company for years, and Olivia had always admired his professionalism and calm demeanor. But now, as he stepped into the room, she couldn't help but feel the weight of his disappointment. "Olivia," Ethan said, his voice measured but kind. "The airline's management team has reviewed the situation, and the public backlash is significant. I'm afraid the company can't afford to ignore it any longer." Olivia nodded slowly, already knowing where this was going. "I understand. I messed up. I made a mistake." Ethan sat down across from her, his eyes focused on the desk. "It's not just about the mistake, Olivia. It's about the impact your actions have had, not just on the Carter family but on the reputation of this company. We are committed to treating all passengers with respect, and what happened on that flight goes against everything we stand for. I wish things had gone differently, but this situation is too big to just brush off." Olivia's throat tightened as she listened to Ethan's words. She had been hoping, against all odds, that her mistake would be forgotten, that somehow, the incident would be downplayed and the media would move on. But it was clear now that there was no escaping the consequences. The public had spoken, and they were demanding accountability. Skyline Airlines was being held responsible for her actions, and they couldn't afford to lose their standing in the industry because of one flight attendant's lapse in judgment. "We've made the decision to relieve you of your duties, effective immediately," Ethan said, his voice softening slightly. "There will be an investigation into the incident, and we'll follow the necessary procedures. But for now, you won't be returning to your position." The words hit Olivia like a punch to the stomach. Her career was over. She had never imagined that it would end like this. She had always believed that she was untouchable, her work ethic, her dedication, her professionalism. But now, it all felt meaningless. She had betrayed the very principles she had worked so hard to uphold, and there was no coming back from it. "I understand," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan gave her a sympathetic look. I'm sorry, Olivia. I know this is hard, but you need to take responsibility for your actions. You've already shown that you're willing to do that by acknowledging what happened, but now it's time to learn from it. Olivia nodded, but the sting of his words was impossible to ignore. She had failed, and now, she was facing the consequences. As Ethan left the room, Olivia's phone buzzed once more. She glanced at it, and her stomach turned. The hashtag Olivia Blake is over was trending even more than before. It was no longer just a matter of professional failure, it had become a public spectacle. She had been exposed for all to see, and there was no escaping the fallout. For the first time, Olivia understood the full weight of her actions. She had thought she was just doing her job, but she had crossed a line. And now, as the social media backlash continued to swell, she knew that she would never be able to undo the damage. Her career in the airline industry was over, and she could only hope that, somehow, she would learn from this painful experience. As Olivia Blake sat in the small office, the weight of her failure settled over her like a thick fog. The harsh reality that her career in the airline industry was over was beginning to sink in. She had spent years cultivating a reputation for professionalism and competence, but it had all been undone by a single moment of judgment, a moment that had spiraled into a public scandal. Now, as she sat there, waiting for the inevitable next step, the sting of her actions was almost unbearable. The airline's management had already made it clear that she would be removed from the flight attendant roster, at least temporarily, while the investigation into the incident with the Carter family took place. Her phone was still buzzing with messages and notifications, but she couldn't bring herself to check them. The thought of facing the world beyond these walls, where her actions had been witnessed and recorded by thousands, was almost too much to bear. Her name was trending on social media, and not for the reasons she had ever imagined. Olivia's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. She looked up, and Marcus Bryant, the airline's director of passenger relations, entered the room. His expression was somber, his steps measured as he approached Olivia's desk. It was clear that he wasn't here to offer comfort or reassurance. The situation had already escalated beyond repair, and now, it was time to face the consequences head-on. "Olivia," Marcus began, his voice gentle but firm, "I need to speak with you about what comes next. We've received numerous complaints, not just from the Carter family but from other passengers as well. The video has gone viral, and the damage to the airline's reputation is significant." Olivia nodded silently, unable to look him in the eye. The reality of what had happened was too much to process all at once. She had been so caught up in the moment, so blinded by her own assumptions, that she had failed to see how deeply her actions would affect the people around her. "The company is conducting a full review of the incident," Marcus continued. "We're taking this very seriously, and I need to be clear with you. The airline cannot condone this kind of behavior. We hold our staff to the highest standards, and what happened today was a direct violation of those standards." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest, and she finally met Marcus's gaze. She could see the disappointment in his eyes, and it felt like a physical blow. This was the man who had once trusted her, who had seen her as a valuable member of the team. And now, all of that trust had been shattered. "I know I messed up," Olivia said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for it to go this far. I didn't realize the impact of my actions until it was too late." Marcus let out a heavy sigh. "Olivia, this isn't just about making a mistake. This is about the deeper issue of unconscious bias, something that we as an organization need to address on a much larger scale. Your actions were not isolated, they were part of a pattern that we, as an airline, can no longer ignore." The words hung in the air, and Olivia felt the weight of them. Unconscious bias. She had never considered herself to be biased, never thought she would be capable of treating anyone unfairly based on their appearance. But now, looking back, it was clear that she had let her assumptions cloud her judgment. She had made decisions based on how people looked, not who they were or what their ticket said. And that was the painful truth she had to face. "I understand," Olivia said softly, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. But I did. And I can't undo that." Marcus paused, allowing the silence to linger for a moment before speaking again. "The next steps are being determined as we speak. You will receive further instructions from Human Resources, but for now, I need you to understand that this goes beyond just your job. It's about the message this sends to our passengers, our employees, and the public. Skyline Airlines is committed to providing a safe and welcoming environment for all our passengers, and that commitment cannot be compromised." Olivia nodded, feeling the tears welling up in her eyes. She had spent so many years building a career she was proud of, and now it was all slipping through her fingers. The shame of what she had done, the hurt she had caused, it was all too much to bear. She had failed the Carter family, yes, but she had also failed herself, and in the process, she had failed her colleagues, the passengers, and the airline that had trusted her. As Marcus stood to leave, he gave her a final look of sympathy. "We all make mistakes, Olivia," he said softly. "But it's how we learn from them that matters. I hope you take this time to reflect on what's happened and find a way to grow from it. It's not too late for you to make things right, but that starts with owning up to what you did." The door closed behind him, and Olivia was left alone in the room. She sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the desk in front of her. Her phone continued to buzz with notifications, but she couldn't bring herself to check them. What was the point? She knew what people were saying. She knew how they were reacting. The damage had already been done. As the reality of the situation settled in, Olivia felt a deep sense of isolation. She had made a mistake, and now she was facing the consequences. She had been so sure of herself, so confident in her ability to handle any situation, but this was different. This was a moment of profound failure, and there was no escaping it. But amidst the darkness of her thoughts, one small flicker of clarity emerged. This wasn't the end for her. It couldn't be. The road ahead would be difficult, and the road to redemption would be long, but she knew that if she truly wanted to make things right, she would have to start by facing herself. It wouldn't be easy, but she had to start somewhere. And that somewhere had to be now. The incident involving the Carter family and Olivia Blake offers an invaluable lesson about the importance of humility, respect, and the power of assumptions. What began as a routine interaction quickly escalated into a public spectacle, showing how unchecked biases and hasty judgments can have profound consequences. Olivia, a seasoned flight attendant, prided herself on her professionalism, but in a split second, her assumptions about the Carter family's rightful place in premium economy led to a humiliating confrontation. The Carter family, once eager to enjoy a long-awaited vacation, found themselves unjustly treated, forced to vacate their seats despite having paid for them. This incident serves as a stark reminder that assumptions about others, based on appearance, race, or any other superficial factor, can cloud our judgment and create unnecessary tension. Olivia's actions weren't a result of malicious intent, but of a momentary lapse in considering the full picture. This underscores how bias can operate subtly and unconsciously within us all, affecting how we treat others and the decisions we make. It also speaks to the responsibility we each bear in confronting these biases, whether in the workplace or in our daily lives. The Carter family's experience also highlights the importance of standing up for one's dignity in the face of injustice, as well as the broader societal implications of such encounters. When faced with disrespect, they could have chosen to remain silent, but instead, they calmly but firmly addressed the issue. Their willingness to assert their rights, even in the face of public scrutiny, serves as a model for all of us. Respect isn't a privilege, it's a right that should be extended to everyone, regardless of their background, appearance, or social standing. As we reflect on these lessons, it's crucial to understand that our actions, however seemingly small, can have a lasting impact on others. Olivia Blake's career, once built on years of hard work, unraveled as a result of a single moment. The Carter family's vacation was marred by an unjust experience that threatened to overshadow their entire trip. These events show how the ripple effect of our actions extends far beyond the immediate situation, affecting the lives and reputations of others. Let this serve as a reminder for all of us to be more mindful of how we perceive others, to challenge our biases, and to always approach situations with empathy. True growth comes from acknowledging our mistakes, learning from them, and striving to make things right. If we can do that, we can build a more just and understanding world for everyone. If you found this message meaningful, please take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to ring the bell to stay updated on our latest content. Your support is appreciated, and it helps spread messages of kindness and understanding. Thank you for watching.